Rhetorical Quest.
Today we're going to talk about a really important concept in the study of communication, and that is the concept of emotions and communication. People have been studying emotions and communication as long as there's been a formal study of communication. We can take it back to Aristotle and look at his notion of pathos and communication. Now, Aristotle, being Aristotle, really liked to make lists. And so he tried to list all of the emotions that we could have and how those would affect our communication. Right now, we'd probably consider that to be a little silly and actually even somewhat troubling. We'll get to that maybe in a little bit. But we can see that he was thinking through how communication and emotions affect each other. But there's more to emotions than just Aristotle's listing of emotions and talking about how we could move audiences to feel emotions. Right now, we think about something like emotional intelligence that we'll call our EQ, which is the ability to understand and manage your own emotions and be sensitive to others' feelings. Sometimes I like this idea of EQ because it shows that emotional ability is really, really important. Sometimes I don't like it because it sounds like IQ, and there's some really big differences between them. One of the big differences is that your IQ is more or less stable as you go through your life, right? I had an IQ test when I was a really, really little kid, and showed my IQ as being a certain score, and here I am, late 40s, and I have a PhD and I've studied all of this stuff. But I had an IQ test relatively recently, a formal one, as part of an evaluation that I went through. And it showed that my IQ was basically the same as it's always been. There's really not going to be much change in your IQ. Education doesn't increase your IQ. There's going to be very little change as you go through your life in your IQ, but your EQ is something you can actually develop. You can learn to better manage your own emotions and to be more sensitive to the emotions of others. And that's really what I want to talk about today. We want to talk about guidelines of emotions and managing our emotions. Now, the first step of raising your EQ, if that's something that you want to do, is getting better at recognizing what your feelings are. What am I feeling right now? And this can be a little harder than you might think. You have to actually take a few minutes sometimes and say, okay, I know I'm feeling something strong, or maybe I don't feel like I'm feeling very much. So what am I feeling? And being able to recognize your feelings is one of the first steps towards raising your EQ. The next step is to recognize the difference between thinking, feeling, and acting. We want to know that these are not the same. Sometimes you think a certain thing, sometimes you feel a certain way, but you don't have to act based on your feelings. You don't have to think based on your feelings. You can make decisions that involve your feelings, that respect your feelings, but are not your feelings. Another tool, if you want to raise your EQ, is you need to try and expand your emotional vocabulary. We can see this wheel of emotions that I've got over here on the right side of the page, and you probably can't see it all that well on the video. If you want to zoom in or something or pause, you can, but I don't have a good citation for this. I just Googled it because I've seen it in a lot of places, and none of the places where I've seen it are they citing the original source. So I don't really know what it is. So I just recommend Googling wheel of emotions. It's a really neat tool for trying to describe what your emotions are. But it's not the only one. But trying to find specific language that really captures the emotion you're feeling is a really valuable tool. Another important tool for raising your EQ is to learn to share multiple feelings. To not just say, well, I'm angry or I'm sad, but I'm angry and I'm hurt and I'm lonely, right? To share all of these together, to put all of that information together, really helps us get to the core of what it is that we're feeling. It's also really important to consider where and when you express your feelings. You don't want to always express your feelings in the moment when you first feel them, when you haven't evaluated them, you haven't analyzed them, you just feel them and then you express them right now. That's not safe, it's not healthy, and it's not a good idea. It gets us in a lot of trouble. But there are times and there are places where we can express our feelings. Sometimes we have to get away for a little bit and express our feelings privately. Sometimes we can express our feelings to some people and not other people. And these are all things that we need to consider when we're thinking about where and when to express our feeling. One of the most important ways to raise your EQ is to get to the point where you actually accept your responsibility for your feelings. To say that nobody can make you angry. Something happens and you chose anger as your response. Nobody can make you sad. Something happened and you chose sadness as your response. These are your feelings and you're responsible for them, and you're responsible for what you do with your feelings. And so understanding that nobody else is responsible for your feelings, it's just you. That's a huge step. If we want to raise our emotional intelligence, our EQ, part of that is understanding that there is a relationship between the media we use and our expression of emotions. Certain media are not appropriate to convey certain emotions. The leaner a medium is, the less facilitative it is of sharing emotions. In general, you probably don't want to text emotional things via text message, but I also know that sometimes if you want to not share emotions that it's not an appropriate time to share, sometimes you can share those via text, share information via text message and leave emotion out that you don't really need to have. So just really thinking about, what is the medium over which I'm sharing this emotion, and is this an appropriate medium for this emotion? And once we've done all of that work, understanding our emotions and getting and following those guidelines for emotions, we still have to manage our emotions. And one important tool for managing our emotions is understanding the difference between facilitative and debilitative emotions. Adler, Proctor, and Manning, in their book Looking Out, Looking In, talk about three sources of debilitating emotions. One is our physiology. There's certain emotions we have that give us a flight or fight response, or kind of build on themselves. And to a certain extent, those are good survival emotions. And so our bodies respond, but sometimes they're responding to things that we don't really need right now. There's also emotional memory. Sometimes you start to relate an experience you're having now with an experience that took place in the past, and you feel not only the current emotions, but the past emotion on top of that, and that ends up making the emotion debilitative. And the other is self-talk. Sometimes we talk ourselves into feeling things that we don't really need to feel right now. Sometimes the self-talk in which we engage that leads to debilitative emotions are what we call emotional fallacies. Now, some of you have watched other videos or been in classes with me, and you've heard me talk about logical fallacies. And emotional fallacies are similar in that they're things that can happen with language that move us into a less useful way of thinking. The first emotional fallacy that I talk about is the fallacy of perfection. The idea that happiness is perfection, or that we can somehow experience perfection. We can't. Perfection is something we'll never experience on this earth. Kenneth Burke, an important communication theorist, said that human beings are rotten with perfection. And he puts this notion of perfection in as just something that comes from language use and our ability to see what's not there. But we'll never see all that could be there, because it'll never all be there. And at some point, we have to just say, we are going to just enjoy what's here and not wish for something else. The fallacy of approval is another thing that can just mess us up. The idea that everybody needs to be okay with us. Now, certainly there are some people we want to be okay with us, but even those people closest to us, when they ask us to sacrifice our values or our well-being, uh, this desire to be approved of by them is going to mess you up emotionally. So you have to at some point say, I've got to do the right thing, not necessarily the thing you like. We can fall victim to the fallacy of shoulds, that this should be a certain way, that this is the way things should go. But it's not the way things are going to be, and it's not the way things are going to go. And if we're all focused on, well, this is how it should be, we can trap ourselves in this debilitative emotion. We can also get messed up by overgeneralizing. Where we start to say something is always one way, or all of something is a particular way, or this is just the way things are around here, when that's not necessarily true. It seems that way when we take our little things and then generalize them to everything around us. My brother has a phrase that one of his mentors shared with him, and he shared it with me, and that is that nobody ever, always, and nevers. So nobody ever, always, and nevers. If you say somebody always do something or never does something, you're probably in a bad place, and you're facilitating negative or debilitative emotions. You're making them grow. And okay, radical honesty here. The fallacy of helplessness is one into which I fall very often, where I'm just like, there is nothing that can be done. And I get so upset because I just don't see a way out of it. And then I start to feel more upset because I feel trapped, and I feel like I can't get away from some kind of negative thing that's happening to me. And the truth is that there's always something you can do. And maybe it's just for a little while, or just a little bit. Viktor Frankl was a man who studied emotion, and he was in the concentration. He was a Jewish man in the concentration camps in Germany during World War II, and he talked about the different emotional states of people who were there, and how people who facilitated a negative feeling about being in this really negative place that is worse than anything I've ever experienced. People who could feel good while they were there, they seemed to him to be more likely to survive. And the people who felt uh, hopeless and helpless while they were in there, those are the ones who were more likely to die. Once again, another one of these. Oh, I just said once again. Another one of these that I fall into fairly often is the fallacy of catastrophic expectations. I think things are going to go poorly. And I can look into all kinds of reasons for that. Maybe the way I was raised, or experiences I had, or actually, I think experiences my grandparents had that make me think, up, things are just going to really be awful. And sometimes they are, but honestly, most things are not as bad as I usually expect. So, what can we do about this? What can we do about this debilitating expectations that we experience? Well, there are a few things that can help us. One is monitor our emotional reactions. So, we recognize that we had a debilitative emotional event. Something happened and we maybe didn't respond to it the best way that we could have. So, you do that, you note the activating event. Now, this not like this thing happened and made you behave this way, but this thing happened and you chose this way of feeling. And so when that happens, when you note the activating event, you can say, okay, what was it about this event? Did it trigger things from my past? And how can I talk myself out of being controlled by my past? Did it make me think that the worst, what was it that right now made me feel this? And record your self-talk. I think that journaling is really important. Lots of different kinds of journaling are useful. Sometimes you can actually modify your self-talk in that moment. I know for a while, I don't know if she still does, but for quite a while, my wife kept a gratitude journal that was just, these are the things for which I am thankful. To make that part of her self-talk, but also to say, you know what, I was talking to myself and I told myself this stuff and it wasn't really good. And then reappraise your irrational beliefs. And you have them and they are irrational. If you're having debilitative emotions, emotions that are not helping you in your relationships, then your beliefs are likely irrational. And you need to go back and figure out what it is that is making you feel this way and then change it. And when I say making you feel, is it your past? Is it your self-talk? What is it that's bringing you to these bad places? And then figure out how to fix that. But we don't just want to minimize our debilitative emotions. We also want to facilitate or maximize our facilitative emotions. We want to facilitate our facilitative emotions too, but that's where they're redundant. So anyway, but we want to do that. We want to make our facilitative emotions come to the fore. So what are facilitative emotions? Facilitative emotions are emotions that aid us in having better relationships, right? So they're the emotions that actually make things better for us. And there's a few things that we can do to make that happen. One of the things we can do is really just concentrate, go over and over and over in our lives about the good things in our lives, because there are going to be good things in your lives. And then when you have really cool experiences, really neat things that happen, just really enjoy and savor those moments. And sometimes you're going to have challenging situations. You're going to have things come up that you might say would make you mad, make you sad, make you anything. Well, think about it. Reappraise those challenging situations. What are other emotions that you could choose in this situation that will facilitate your relationships rather than debilitate them? Now it's time to hear from you. I would love to hear about the ways in which you are working to raise your emotional intelligence. I'd like to hear about the things you're working on, and how you are making them better. What tools you used, whether they're tools from this video or even better, other tools that you've learned about from other contexts that we can start to bring as a community together. So if you're one of my students, I want you to write your answers in the discussion prompt here on the assignment where you're looking at this video. But if you're not one of my students and you're just watching this on YouTube, I would love it if you would go ahead and comment in the discussion below, in the comments. Tell me what you think about your emotional intelligence, what tools you've used to make your emotional intelligence better.